So my guest wrote a couple great books. She wrote The Barbizon, which is about a very famous all-female residential hotel in New York over on Lexington Avenue. We'll talk about that. And also, more recently, she wrote She-Wolves, which is about the untold story of women on Wall Street. Very interesting, actually. Both very interesting. I believe, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but they bought the TV rights or something, movie rights to this, right, Paulina? TV rights. So that's right. So you may be seeing George Clooney. I don't know who the TV stars are. All right. But please welcome to the stage Professor, Vassar, author, Paulina Bren, everybody. How you doing? There you go. This is for you. No problem.
I feel there's some false advertising here because when you sent me clips to entice me here, your guests were sitting in armchairs. True or not true?
Well, you know, the economy's taking a hit, all right? I don't know if you've been paying attention, but, you know, you got to make some cuts, you know? All right, so very, very happy to have you here. Thank you so much for coming,
Thank you so
Paulina.
much. Thank you. Hi, everybody.
Have you enjoyed the show so far?
I have, actually, yes.
Cool. Have I been able to teach a professor at Vassar something? Oh, Vassar. Oh, look at that alumni.
Oh, Vassar. Any other Vassar? They're everywhere. Any others? No? Okay.
We don't have a Vassar alumni event here, meetup? No? So let's start with the Barbizon. So,
yes.
Just so you guys know, a little background. The Barbizon was actually a residential hotel opened in the 1920s on 63rd and Lex. It was for women. It was specifically for women. Now keep in mind, back then, it was not common for women to just try their luck in New York alone. It was very much so to kind of create a safe place for women to arrive in a peculiar new city, all this stuff. And today, it is obviously condos. You know, let's be honest. It's condos today.
Very expensive condos where Ricky Gervais.
I found this funny. The owner, or the chairman of Meow Mix. The chairman of Meow Mix bought 3 apartments there for all of his kids. It's that filthy Meow Mix money. But I thought we could talk about this. I thought it was really interesting in the book. You talk about, especially, you know, in the time it was open and the time it kind of thrived in the 1950s. A lot of famous people, Sylvia Plath, Joan Didion, Grace Kelly, all of these people passed through there, Felicia Rashad. And yeah, very, very cool story. And I thought you could talk a little bit about one of the things you talked about in the book, which is the contradictions in American life. Now, this idea that women had this safe space, they could come and enjoy the city and all that stuff, wasn't without its contradictions, and I thought you could talk about that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So this, especially when the Barbizon was at its heyday, when it was called the Doll's House in the 1950s, the women who were going there, they were going there because, and it wasn't just the famous women, there were a lot of ordinary women who just wanted to come to New York and try to sort of launch themselves, sort of play out their ambitions. But of course, their sell-by date, so to speak, was very short, because in the 1950s, if you weren't married by the age of 25, that was it. It was a no-go. And so on the one hand, there was a space to try to sort of play to the ambitions that men were permitted to have. And at the same time, you had about 5 years tops to do that. And of course, the other contradiction was sexual, where the reason that women were often allowed by their families to go to New York unchaperoned was because this was a very respectable place to be. And the reason it was respectable was because men were not allowed anywhere above the lobby. And of course, there were many stories of how men would dress up as
like a giant bush.
Especially as an Upper East Side visiting gynecologist. That was a big one. Yeah.
Very subtle.
Exactly.
Very subtle.
So men did try, and some claim to have achieved getting past the lobby. But it was really about constraint. If you can show constraint, then you are respectable, and therefore you have leeway that you wouldn't have otherwise as a woman at this time.
Yeah, so, and I brought this up because I think both books kind of speak to the contradictions in American life. Obviously, She-Wolves, we'll talk about that in a second, but it talks about how women were treated on Wall Street and how recently they broke into Wall Street and how that was really this stronghold of like a boys' culture, locker room culture. But I wonder if you could talk briefly too. The interesting thing about contradictions is that all you have to do to find contradictions in the United States is open your eyes. I mean, the United States is contradictions. That's all it is, pretty much. But in a way, though, it's kind of also what provides hope in the United States. There's the hope that it's kind of like aspirational almost. The United States, the Constitution, all that stuff was created at a time when that wasn't the norm, and it's given us something to kind of strive for and continue to strive for, and that's kind of what these books are about as well, a little bit, no?
To some extent, yeah. I mean, American aspirational values, I think we're done with that.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody's aspiring to those values right now, so that's gone. I think.
Well, some people are. In all fairness, I do think I will say, just to be a little bit optimistic, some people are. The people making the rules aren't, but some people are, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think we can differ. But I would say contradictions. I mean, I like contradictions. I mean, I think it's what makes stories. It's what makes history. It's what makes things interesting. I actually wish we Americans would embrace contradiction more. If anything, it's sort of this tendency to insist on things being clear-cut, black and white. And if you think about just like the word freedom, right? Constant use of the word freedom in this country. You know, what does it mean? You know, to be free from, you know, government that doesn't give you health care. You know, what does... So anyway, so I do think contradiction is actually wonderful, and we should all embrace it.
Yeah, it's nuance. I mean, that's kind of what
exactly,
it is. Yeah.
Precisely.
I thought it was interesting in the book, too, you talk about, at the time, the anti-communism movement really went after feminism. And not to mention, obviously, civil rights. But you talk about feminism in the book. Why do you think that's the case? Because I think that's a very common thing. Even today, you'll see, you know, establishment things go after things like feminism, the LGBTQ community, all those things. Why do you think that is?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Though we did learn that nobody remembers the Cold War in your previous piece. So, you know, but we are talking about McCarthyism here.
Yeah.
Well, I think always that when there is a sense of a global threat, and in those days it was, of course, communism and the Iron Curtain and so forth, I think when there's the threat of that, then it gets to be played out on women's bodies, especially on women's lives. And so that's what happened, where because women behind the Iron Curtain were being forced to work, that was part of, you know, that women had equality, and therefore they too would go work in the factories. So it almost became this obsession. The American women, and it came at a time when one salary was enough for a family, so American women did not have to work. That's the way we could reinforce the fact that we're not communist, right? And of course, when in 1963, when Betty Friedan came out with The Feminine Mystique, what that book is really, it's a story and multiple stories of the women who, through the 1950s, had to play out this sort of ideological mythology. So she really writes about these women who had great educations, but then they were expected to move to the suburbs, have as many children as they could possibly have, do nothing but clean the house, look after the kids, and pop a lot of Valium. I mean, that's literally what she writes about.
That's the life.
So I guess that's our future for the next decade.
Yeah.
But, I shouldn't say decade, 4 years, I'm sorry.
Well, it might be a decade, actually. I don't know. I'm just kidding. No, okay.
But it's something we see all the time.
Yeah, for sure. And I thought the story of Sylvia Plath was very telling, because Sylvia Plath, you guys don't know, she wrote The Bell Jar, but she also committed suicide very young, and she was kind of a victim of these contradictions and someone who was grappling with these things.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it really, Sylvia Plath falls into everything we've been saying here. So the thing about the Barbizon Hotel, if you've ever heard of or read Sylvia Plath's only novel, The Bell Jar, it's actually about her time in 1953 when she was at the Barbizon, which she renames the Amazon in her novel. And having spoken to the women she was with, the cohort, they were all interns at Mademoiselle magazine, which was a really big deal in those days to be an intern. You do anything to be an intern if you were an up-and-coming writer or artist. And I talked to the women there and who were there with her, and I have to say, they all basically, The Bell Jar is so biographical. It really, it's hard after having done all this research to even see it as a novel. But absolutely, she in her life and what she expresses in the novel, she spirals into, again, we're linking back to the first comedian, into mental health issues. And a lot of this is brought on by these contradictions. She is somebody who she's there in 1953 in New York, and she is, she has desire, she has ambition, she has yearning, and she's not allowed to have it the way men have it. And she writes about this in her diary. She's so angry. She's so angry that she can't express any of this, and men get to express it. They get to do exactly what they want. And what's interesting, she also, I think, a lot of her undoing was she had all these contradictions in her, but you couldn't see it on the surface. When later she became so famous as a poet and then having written The Bell Jar, the editors that she worked with at Mademoiselle magazine were asked about her. And the response was, oh, she was just like another pretty smart blonde. Nothing special. And I think there was so much hidden behind that facade. So absolutely, she embodied all of that.
Yeah, and this is, I think, a good segue into your other book. If you mind if I move this?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, well, there goes that. What we can do?
We can give it away. It's fine.
Here you go. There, She-Wolves is the next book. Read both of them. How about that? Huh? How many interviewers you know do that?
You're no dilettante.
No, that's right. Great book, by the way. Both were great. Both were great. I thought She-Wolves was also super interesting because of the world it covers. I mean, Wall Street is such a big part of everyone here's life because we, at the very least, you probably have, some Wall Street bros stumbling out of the bar under your apartment or something like that. We know it. Like, it's very familiar as well. And I thought that was an interesting, I guess, because it's so recent too. So recent how recently women were allowed into this. We're talking like the 1960s, really. Like, that's crazy, It's like our parents' generation. And I thought this was a good thing to talk about because they were breaking into this men's field, this men's industry, pretty much. It was designed by men, for men, and participated in by men, meaning that it's very flawed, obviously. But they sought to be a part of it. And I think that's kind of what your books are getting at, that women want to just be at the table. And there's quotes to that effect in the book. Just be at the table. It's not going to fix itself from the outside even. But even if they are part of a system that's broken, whatever, it's not going to fix itself from the outside either way. I thought you could maybe talk about this, desire and I guess the flaws of systems like that, even when women are participating.
Yeah, absolutely. Is anybody here a Wall Street person?
Anyone work on Wall Street?
What a shocker. Nobody. Did anybody very quietly put their hand up?
Someone just pointed someone else out.
Oh, okay.
That's okay. We don't know. It's all right.
They wouldn't point. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, actually, it turned out to be. I mean, I should say, I started as a historian of communism and everyday life behind the Iron Curtain, and then after 2 books, I did a massive U-turn, and now I write popular narrative nonfiction about women in America. And when I started this book on She-Wolves, I mean, I had no experience with Wall Street whatsoever. And that actually made it, I think, more fascinating because I was coming at this with open eyes and no judgments, really. And to see what happened. And the story begins in the 60s, a little bit in the 50s, but really from the 60s I go to 9/11 in 2001. And I didn't realize how much, I knew it would be, to some extent, a lot of stories of sexual harassment, and they're there, and they're jaw-dropping, but I didn't want that to be the center of the book. Some of the things that I found really shocking, well, one, I write a lot about women's bathrooms because exactly as you just said, these places were literally built for men. And so when women came, there were no bathrooms for them. Or if you were suddenly the first woman who was trading on the New York Stock Exchange in 1976, had a really rough time of it. Not only did they send really nasty things dildos, down the pneumatic tubes that they usually sent stock quotes. But she also had to walk miles to get to a bathroom. So there's a lot of discussion of bathrooms because the system was built literally for men. But I think one of the things that I found particularly shocking of the first women who were coming in the 60s and 70s was that I guess I didn't expect to what extent they were almost always the only woman in the room. And actually, when I started to do the research, the way it works in the publishing world, in popular, like regular books, you actually do a book proposal in nonfiction. You sell the book proposal, and then you start your serious research. And at the same time, was optioned for a TV series. So I was at the same time I was doing research. I had a monthly Zoom with the production team, these wonderful bunch of women who were sort of at the same time trying to put together a TV series. So we were finding these discoveries together because nothing had been written about this before. And sort of as we started to realize that it was usually just one woman in a room, they were like, how do we do a series about women on Wall Street when there's one woman in the room? So they quickly were like, we'll start in the 80s. So there were just a lot of really surprising things to see about, with the case of the Barbizon, these women they didn't have a chance to really exist in men's worlds, and they tried to create this other world in the Barbizon, and then sort of make entry into modeling and acting and these sorts of, and the arts where women were allowed. But here, the she-wolves, very different type of woman too. At the beginning, the women who come in on Wall Street, they were a scrappy bunch. So they were trying to really penetrate this old boys club.
Well, and to that point in the book, you talk about some of those original women, the original trailblazers, and their approach to it. Their approach was much more tough as nails and a little more kind of unforgiving of the new people who follow their footsteps. Almost seeing it as a little bit kind of, maybe not the word, but like whiny or like, to kind of suck it up. We did it, you should do it. So it's kind of interesting how even amongst women there was different approaches to it because they had to be so tough, to get in first.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There was a lot of friction, and I still hear it when I give talks because the book came out, She Wills, in September, so it's just been a lot of talks. And I still hear it from those two generations where the women who come in the 80s and now it's in droves and they have the big shoulder pads and they have the Walkman on, and they are not liking the older generation who they think act like men, and the older generation is really pissed off that the younger women don't realize what they did for them. So
yeah, and there were some really, it's easy to, I guess, take for granted the culture today, and it's hard to kind of put yourself in the place of people back then. You can read about it and say, okay, the first woman, fine, but you don't really realize like what that meant day to day. There were so many examples in the book, like for example, just the way women, they weren't allowed, but they felt like they couldn't show the pictures of their children on desks because it would be looked at like you were living another life outside of the place, outside of the bank. You weren't as devoted to the bank, whereas men did it all the time because they were kind of showcasing their virility. Like, look how many kids I made. Whereas like women were just kind of like, oh, I can't show that. I have to, devotion. This guy Michael Werner, I thought this was wild. He's still a professor at Graduate School of Business in Chicago. He asked a question in an interview of a female candidate. Would you be willing to get an abortion for this job, to keep this job? Like that, it was in an interview. He asked that kind of question and all kinds of things like that. I thought there's another interesting, Merrill Lynch. By the way, that was at, I think, Goldman Sachs when he asked that question. That was Goldman Sachs. Merrill Lynch used to ask a question at their interviews. They would say, to men, obviously, they would ask, what qualities do you look for in a wife? And they had to ask this of a woman because it was already designed. They're like, well, we have to ask for a woman. And the woman said, I guess intelligence. She got 0 points for that. 0 points for intelligence. It wasn't the correct answer.
Wrong answer.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, like, there's just so many stories. I mean, women weren't allowed to eat at Delmonico's unattended or unaccompanied. So they basically brought the coachmen in from outside and told them to sit with them for a bit, and so they could eat all these kind of
19th century.
That's like, and any of these places, like people forget, McSorley's right around the corner, pretty much didn't allow women until 1970. Like it was all guys till 1970. So these are things. I also thought the story of the sweater girl was kind of funny.
Yes.
There's this woman in the 1960s, I believe, who worked in Wall Street, and they called her the sweater girl, and people, all the men, would line up outside of the Wall Street subway stop waiting for her to come out because of the way she kind of popped out of her sweater.
Yeah, and by September of 1967, she first showed up in May. She was this young woman from Brooklyn, and nothing particularly unique about her except her 43-inch chest. And a guy noticed her. She was coming out of the subway on the first day of her job, and he told another guy, and he told another guy. By September, there were thousands. She had a police escort.
Yeah, there were pictures.
Yeah.
There are pictures
there
of
were
all the men hanging out. It looks like a parade or something. They're all waiting for her to come out of the subway.
Yeah, it's in my book, a photo of the thousands of people waiting for Francine Gottfried from Brooklyn.
Yeah, the sweater girl, yeah. Everyone's like, how do you spell that? I get home right. Google. So all this to kind of get to the discussion about this. I mean, we talked about how some of the early women made their kind of path, and how later people benefit from that, but also had to put up with a lot. There was a quote you said in the book that I thought was interesting, where you say, "Change does not guarantee transformation," which I thought was interesting. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I snuck that in, even though it's not an academic book.
Yeah.
So Judith Bennett is this historian, and she wrote a famous study of medieval female beer brewsters, and she basically, I won't bore you with the details, but her major point is that throughout history you might see change, but change does not mean transformation. And in fact, when she came to speak at Vassar College like 10 years ago or something, she made a really good point, and think about this. She said, as soon as you start to see a profession that is letting women in, you know that profession is, I don't know how to put this, that profession is starting to decline. And so she gave the example of academia. As more and more professors are adjuncts, as there's sort of less of a drive, there's less of a concept that you have to go to college to be successful. The pay isn't so good, the adjuncts are on the rise and everything. As that's happening, more and more women are actually in the profession. They're able to get into academia. So you often see that. So you might say, oh, there are more women in this, there are more women in this. You have to stop and think, does that mean change or does it mean transformation?
Right. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's in for the long haul, that it's going to change
or that
for
it's
good.
Actually, or that it's somehow empowering, right, and there's something really positive about it. Maybe just there are more women now because the pay has dropped.
Right. Not to mention the culture around those things also changes more slowly, and how people are treated and all that. Well, okay, kind of to kind of wrap this up here a little bit with this discussion, I guess, what gives you, I guess, hope? I mean, having done this work. I was expecting that. That's okay. I was expecting that.
Next question.
But okay, well, all right. Well, then let me rephrase. Based on your research and experience, especially as a professor, and you meet so many young people and all that, what do you think people can do? What do you think is the way? What do you hope people walk away from your book with? What do you hope it incites people to do?
Ooh. I don't really aim for that, but I'm going to say today was a good day because of the marches.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we need to hold onto that. I have to say I was really happy about the marches because a friend and I actually, back in 2016, we organized the big march in the Hudson Valley. March Across the Hudson, I think we called it. We thought a couple of hundred would show up, and it was 7,000. But then we saw what happened, right? So we're back here again. So I was one of those people, having done that, felt rather demoralized. But I was so glad to see that, again, people felt demoralized, but they were out marching today. So I'm going to leave it there and say I was just really happy about that.
Yeah. So little victories. Little victories. I always like to bring up if you guys ever read the book Hope in the Dark by Rebecca Solnit, it's great. It's all about basically progressive movements and people who fight for change and all that, and how really part of the job description of being any kind of change seeker, progressive, whatever, is finding hope. is finding reasons to continue and is finding victories, because they're not always easy to find. And it's easier for the status quo to point to victories than it is for people trying to change it. So that being said, we're going to move on to the part to get to know you bit. We got a little bit of time left, so lighten it up a little bit. We're going to do some rapid fire questions, all right? Professor, so let's get started. Just go right through this. Who, if you saw them in New York, would make you starstruck?
Oh, God.
That's a good answer. All right, next one.
No, I'd say everyone and anyone. Can I tell my little slight brush with fame story?
Sure.
Okay, so when I wrote the Barbizon, I then got a fan letter from Tom Hanks.
Whoa.
On his, he has a fetish for typewriters. I don't know if you know this, but he collects typewriters, so it was on
Check
one
out his
of
OnlyFans.
Yeah, exactly.
Should know all about
Sexy.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he typed this lovely letter to me on one of his typewriters, and then I got in touch with his rep, and I was like, could I thank him? Do you have an email address for him? So she gave it to me, so I emailed him. And then for a while, I was delusional for a few days, and I thought I could just keep emailing Tom back and forth. And then I realized Tom probably wants me to stop. So I did. But that was my brush with fame.
Nice. You harassed Tom Hanks.
I
Congratulations.
did. I actually did.
Not everyone can say that. All right. What's the craziest thing you've ever seen in New York?
Oh, I don't want to be specific, but it involved excrement.
That's pretty standard. Pretty standard. Okay, if you could do another job other than professor, what would it be? Or writer, what would you do?
I'd be a singer, except I can't even say I can't hold a tune. I literally can't mimic what it sounds like to sing. I don't know if anybody else has that. I was in the car yesterday with my husband and 3 friends. We're coming back from dinner. And we had 70s radio on, and I started to sing along, and they all told me to just stop it right then.
Wow, that is a supportive cast you got behind you. Unbelievable. What's your go-to karaoke song?
They won't let me go.
Wow.
You have no idea how bad it is.
You're in many abusive relationships, it sounds like. Emotionally abusive. Okay. Let's keep moving. What's the most, as a professor, this should be an easy question. What's the most impactful book that you ever read that you would recommend to people?
I wouldn't say it's impactful for, just one that it's one of these things where you read it when you're young, and it made a huge impact at the time. So Doris Lessing's Golden Notebook, which probably nobody's ever heard of at this point, but
all right,
there we go.
Look it up. Yeah,
Not one clap for Doris Lessing's Golden Notebook.
No, they were busy writing it down next to Sweater Girl. One more thing you guys got to look up when you go home. All right. What's your favorite quote?
Oh, quotes belong in your books. I don't have one.
That's a quote. Nice work. Okay, if you could go back to one time period in New York, what would it be?
Probably the 60s, though.
All right.
I feel like that. I feel
Paulina parties.
No, you're not wearing girdles and
Sure.
corsets anymore. I'm guessing you can afford an apartment in Manhattan in the 60s, is he right?
Yeah.
It doesn't smell like urine yet.
Yeah.
I'm just talking about the 70s then come, so that's when when it's Death City.
Sure. Well, that's how you know things are bad, when people's answer to affordable housing is a time machine. That's when you know we're in a good spot. Okay, only a couple more. What is a good slogan for New York?
Careful what you wish for. Careful what you wish for. There we go.
Interesting. All right. If you could live in another place other than New York, where would you live?
I do every summer, and otherwise I do actually kind of live in Prague as well. And
you live in Prague as well?
I do kind of, yes, and Budapest to some extent. So
okay.
I like those places.
So you would live in those places?
Not Orban's Hungary, but I like
Yeah.
Budapest is beautiful and Prague is great.
All right, that's
So
good.
that's good.
Nice. So you're what is it? Tri-coastal kind of. You have 3.
We can call it that, yeah.
Nice. Jet setter, huh? She takes her helicopter over there. Okay, well, just a couple more. Okay, if there's one, what place in New York City best represents the city to you?
To me, this is sort of a personal, not personal, but to me, it's 13th Street between First and A, because when we were graduate students at NYU, and this was in the mid-90s, and I know a long time ago, and we had only $800 to pay for rent, and because we've gone during the summers in Europe, we would always sublet every year. And I think it was one of the, it was like mid-90s. And I was looking for a place to start in September, and there were very few places for $800 in Manhattan at that point. And there was a sublet on 13th between First and A, and you have to think how it looked then. I turned the corner, and it was very desolate. There was also the back of a postal depot there, and I just saw 2 drug dealers. And I went back on First, and then I thought, no, this is the only place we can afford. I got to go back there. So I went there. We ended up renting. It was great. But 10 years later, and this is the story of New York for me, 10 years later, I hadn't been there for a while, 10 years later, passed by. It was so cute. They'd created these wrought iron gates in front of these row houses so that, I guess, homeless people couldn't sleep in your lobby anymore. And it was all so gentrified.
Yeah.
And there were cafes everywhere. I was just shocked.
And the drug dealers opened a cupcake shop.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, the drug dealers were a wonderful security system, so, yay for them. Right. But that's, to me, that's New York.
13th Street between First and A, then.
That is my New York.
All right.
Yeah.
Everyone's got a different New York, I guess. All right. Well, one last question, and then we'll wrap it up. The last important question. This is a tough one. A lot of pressure. Will you be my friend?
Okay.
Reluctantly. That's okay. I'll take it. Guys, one more time for Paulina Bren, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.